Very good. Thank you. Good morning. The time is now 9:34 a.m. and the State Board of Education work session of May 18, 2021 is called to order. Due to the COVID-19 national emergency and in accordance with Public Act 254 of 2020, and Ingham County Board of Commissioners Resolution 21-219, the State Board of Education work session is being convened with remote access technology. May I please have a motion to approve the agenda and order of priority?
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? President Ulbrich.
Yes, I would like to add one agenda item between 5 and 6 to recommend after board norms discussion and motion associated with the June 8th meeting whether it be held virtually or in person. Okay.
So we have a motion to amend the agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll accept it as a friendly amendment, as long as the seconding does.
All right, very good. Any discussion thereof? Let's just, for the officialness of it, let's do a roll call vote, please.
Is this a roll call vote on the amendment or the agenda in full as amended?
On the amendment.
Okay. Lipton?
Yes.
McMillan?
Yes.
Pritchett?
Yes.
Pugh?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
Strayhorn?
Yes.
Tilly, I believe, is absent at the moment. Ulbrich?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. And now a vote on the agenda as amended. If we could do a roll call vote, please.
Lipton?
Yes.
McMillan?
Yes.
Pritchett?
Yes.
Pugh?
Yes.
Snyder? Snyder? I see she's on, maybe technical difficulties. Strayhorn?
Yes.
Tilly, absent. Ulbrich?
Yes.
Back to Snyder?
Yes. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. Board, the first item on the agenda today is the 7th goal of the state's top 10 strategic education plan, addressing the teacher shortage. Board, as you're aware, it's taken educators time to raise the consciousness in the broader community around this important issue. I think we're there at this point. Presenters today will be Ms. Leah Breen, Director of the Office of Educator Excellence, Ms. Kelly Cassidy, Strategic Implementation Consultant of the Office of Educator Excellence, and Ms. Rebecca McIntyre, the Supervisor of the Office of Special Education. There will be a PowerPoint presentation. Presenters, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us here. Can you see my presentation okay?
There you go.
Perfect. Okay. As Dr. Rice mentioned, we are here today to discuss Goal 7. That's a brief update on recent initiatives around increasing the numbers of certified teachers in areas of shortage. I am Leah Breen. I'll start today and then I'll hand it over to Rebecca and Kelly. As you all know, and as Dr. Rice mentioned, Michigan has a teacher shortage. We have an overall shortage, we have regional shortages, and we have shortages in specific content areas. As part of this metric, we also consider the lack of diversity a shortage in our state, and we are interested in increasing the representation of teachers that demonstrate our students' racial and ethnic characteristics. So we'll discuss that as well in this presentation. A couple of statistics for you to start that demonstrate our shortage. Out-of-field teachers for 2019 and 2020 Almost 6% of our certified teachers taught in a subject area for which they did not hold an appropriate endorsement. And almost 11% of certified teachers in schools identified as high poverty taught in a subject area for which they did not hold an appropriate endorsement. So not only does this demonstrate a shortage, but the disproportionality of our shortage in high poverty schools. Extended substitute teaching assignments. So 23% of districts applied for an extension to their daily substitute permit by January 1. So what's that mean? A daily substitute teaching permit is good for 90 days in a single assignment. They're really intended to be used when a teacher is ill or needs to take a personal day. Sometimes they can be used for up to 90 days, for example, at sick leave or extended medical leave or maternity leave. 23% of districts this year had to apply for an extra 90-day extension for an individual holding one of those substitute teaching permits. Teacher diversity. You've seen this before at a board meeting, and I wanted to bring it back to you. This demonstrates the lack of representation in our school districts. As you can see, taking Black, for example, between 2016 and 2017 and 2020 to 2021, we have only increased by 1% representation of our teacher diversity. Hispanic has remained the same. American Indian has remained the same. Asian is 0.1%. Everything else has pretty much remained the same. In academic year 1920, we produced 4,323 educators, and that's both through transfers in from other states as well as new graduates from programs. And we had 6,841 educators that left teaching, that were not represented in the classroom. We need to recruit at least as many educators as we are exiting, and even then, they need to be in the right geographic and content areas to solve our shortages. So what is happening to address the teacher shortages? And that's the update we'd like to bring you today. We're going to discuss a number of things. I've listed them here 1 through 7 with some A's and B's. I'll let you look at that for just a second. And we're going to start by discussing legislative action, or recent legislative action in terms of teacher shortage initiatives. In the past year, the legislature has acknowledged the shortage by first extending the sunset for the critical shortage list. And this allows retired teachers in shortage areas to teach without adverse impact to their retirement benefits. Secondly, it allocates $5 million to state funds for teacher retention bonus pay. And 3, by passing Public Act 316, which allowed for alternative routes to prepare individuals for special education endorsements. Prior to that, we had alternative routes, but they weren't allowed to prepare for special education endorsements. Moving on to our second item, the Welcome Back Proud Michigan Educators campaign. I hope you all have heard of this. We're pretty excited about this. We created an opportunity for formally certified teachers that haven't had access to district-provided professional development to renew their certificate and seek employment. And the way that we did this is by partnering with school districts. They can waive the professional learning hours required for recertification. And the amount that they can waive is really dependent on the years of experience the teacher has had and the amount of time that their certificate has been expired. So there's a little bit of a range of how those things are applied. Over 1,000 educators have expressed interest in the recertification through the campaign, and this actually happened within the first 13 days, so that was really exciting. 700 of these educators have expressed interest in sharing their contact information with districts, because that's something that we ask when they express interest is, would you be willing to share your contact information with districts that are interested? Districts have been requesting waivers for individual educators in preparation for the 21-22 academic year to participate in this campaign. And about 60 districts have expressed interest in receiving the contact information of people from the campaign. We're working on increasing those numbers through visibility and communication, which is where you come in. You can encourage participation in the Welcome Back Proud Michigan Educator campaign We didn't go into all of the details of the campaign today, but there is a link right here where you can visit to gain more information or absolutely send them our way, and we'd be happy to work with both districts and individual educators on this campaign. So this is great news for us. We have information about our special education teacher certification waiver, and for this one, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca. Oh, you're on mute, Rebecca.
Thank you for that. I have dogs in the background that like to spring it on me. So thank you. MDE has created an exciting opportunity that will allow districts and ISDs to address the critical shortage that is currently overwhelming special education. The opportunity comes in the form of a 1-year renewable waiver that's going to provide flexibility to our current requirement that's in place that an appropriately certified and endorsed special education teacher teaches in a program which matches the teacher's endorsement. Specifically, if you want to go on to the next slide, the special education waiver allows for flexible placements for teachers with a special education endorsement in any area to teach in any of these programs. Programs for students with cognitive impairments, emotional impairments, learning disabilities, severe multiple impairments, physical and other health impairment, and what's known as our severe language programs. An applying district would need to be able to demonstrate unsuccessful attempts to fill their position with a properly endorsed teacher. And in order to renew, they would have to be able to show ongoing attempts. And I think that is all with our.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'd like to take the opportunity to brief you a little bit on what's going on with our Future Proud Michigan Educator campaigns. We've talked a little bit about this at the board table before. There's our logo. I think this is new. You may not have seen this. We have, earlier we introduced the concept of grow your own opportunities for students in grades 6 through 12. And there are 2 types of programs that are aimed at students in grades 6 through 12. The first is what we've named the Explore program. This provides the opportunity for high school students to be engaged in innovative programming for exploring education as a career. There are flexible models for implementation, so districts can do this in any way that they choose. It ranges from just observational to actual full immersion in classrooms for a portion of the day. We have provided teacher professional learning in support of this initiative, as well as curricular resources, and we're building a virtual curriculum. So if schools would like to do it flipped, students can actually take their curriculum online on their own time, asynchronous, and be immersed in the classroom during the classroom time. We have awarded planning grants for school districts to kick this off. They were awarded $10,000 per building for this initiative for planning this year in order to implement either next year or the following year. We awarded to about 44 grantees, and they represented over 70 school buildings. So we're really excited about that. Our second Grow Your Own opportunity for students in grades 6 through 12 is what you know as a traditional CTE program. It's called the Education and Training Cluster. It is a jumpstart to higher education, provides career opportunities in high needs fields. Students graduate with job-ready skills, and they are allowed to earn college credits without cost. School districts may choose to participate in both of these programs simultaneously. The Explore program certainly allows school districts that don't have access to CTE programs another opportunity to begin working with students in high school to interest them in the career of teaching and education, the many careers in education. We have Grow Your Own opportunities for paraprofessionals and support staff. We've shared this before, wanted to remind the board that we still have residency programs. These residency programs provide on-the-job training. They're typically a year-long clinical practice. They have support through mentors. The individuals work as teachers while taking coursework, and they may be undergraduate or graduate programs. And so this is a great opportunity, for example, paraprofessionals and other individuals that are already employed in school districts to transition into teaching positions, receive pay while they're finishing coursework. We have other types of expedited programs as well, particularly in world language, special education, library media, and a lot of our secondary subject areas. I'm going to set the stage a little bit here by providing information about our educator preparation providers. For teacher certification, we have about 28 traditional route providers and 8 alternative route providers, plus 2 newly approved providers, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. For administrator certification, we have 17 traditional route providers and 3 alternative route providers. So moving forward, the newest Grow Your Own alternative route programs is on the Rise Academy through DPSCD. The approval for this program was announced on January 13, 2021. It is a Grow Your Own program intended for paraeducators and academic interventionists within Detroit. It also provides additional endorsements for currently certified teachers, and their emphasis is on the development of mathematics, science, and elementary education teachers. They targeted specific content areas to meet their specific needs. Our second new alternative route program that was approved on May 6, 2021 is also a residency on the job training program. The purpose of this program, developed by New Paradigm for Education, or NPFE, is to recruit, train, and retain high quality educators, particularly teachers of color and male teachers of color. And the recruitment for this program begins immediately. This is our first program that is focused on recruitment of male teachers of color. So we're pretty excited to add this to our list of options to improve diversity within our teaching workforce. Speaking of that, we have a plan that is intended to diversify our workforce. One of the initiatives in that plan has recently come to fruition, and you'll be hearing about this shortly. This is a reminder of our teacher diversity chart. Put this back in here to recenter us around the fact that we are currently around 90% white in our teaching workforce. Announced on May 6, 2021, we are issuing some planning grants to help diverse communities of practice. We work with some research partners to identify what would be the highest leverage initiatives to recruit and retain teachers of color in our workforce, and developing communities of practice or spaces for educators of color to come together and talk and share information and experiences and support one another was one of the highest leverage indicators. So we are working to cultivate and develop those communities. We're going to provide high quality, replicable professional development that allow enhancing the experiences of teachers of color, resources and materials designed to support and retain a diverse professional workforce. We're starting with the planning grant for 1 or 2 large school districts or ISDs that will help us develop the materials in support of these communities of practice so that they can be replicated throughout the space in support of our educators of color. And last but not least, moving on to adequate and equitable funding. Essentially, legislators, policymakers, and districts need to help with the #1 reason that educators leave teaching. And this is the initiative that we have not yet addressed. And we need support, and we're trying to figure out how to address. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly for the next set of slides.
Thank you, Ms. Breen. So recently we partnered with the Regional Educational Laboratories, or REL Midwest, to do a study of Michigan teachers who are not teaching. So these are people who hold a certificate, could be valid or expired, but they have not been in a classroom recently. And we wanted to ask them what were the most frequently selected reasons for not teaching. And we found that the #1 thing that they selected was wanting a higher salary. The other thing that we wanted to ask them was, if you were to return to teaching, what could incentivize you to do so? And again, the #1 response was an increase in salary. And so after finding this information, we went looking into what do our districts currently look like? How do we compare across the states? And so the starting teacher salary across the United States, you can see in this list, #1 would be the District of Columbia. The second ranked would be New Jersey, then California. We move far down the list and ranked 41st is the state of Michigan with a starting teacher salary of $37,549. And then the remainder of the states below that. Compared to the average salaries of public school teachers, you can see here Michigan is doing better. We rank 16th for average teacher salary. New York is ranked #1, followed by California and then Massachusetts. Michigan again at 16 for $63,568. And then rounding out the list is Mississippi, Florida, and South Dakota at the end of the list. When we looked at the average salary change and started thinking about what has changed since 2011 to 2012 school year, the Michigan public school teacher salaries have increased by just over 2 to 3% in current dollars over the last 10 years. So there has seen an increase in salaries across the last decade. But after you adjust this for inflation, Michigan's average teacher salary has declined by over 10%. And there is only one other state in the nation that has seen a greater decline. If we start looking at individual districts and we pull some of the collective bargaining agreements to see what exactly is happening in individual schools, you can see 5 sample districts here that were taken from across our state in those collective bargaining agreements with an entry-level base salary. You can see range from $36,277 to $40,867, where the maximum base salary is also listed here with a range of $58,124 through $86,129. So that entry-level salary is remarkable when you look at Michigan's ranking of 41st in the nation, and to see how it actually looks across these collective bargaining agreements, where you can see it's not one individual district that is moving somebody up or down. It is collectively across the state. And so we have some opportunities here. One of the opportunities with federal ESSER funding is to boost staff salaries, particularly for these early career teachers, or to participate in one of the initiatives that has been described earlier by Ms. Breen, such as expanding upon your existing Grow Your Own programs for students and support staff to develop into future proud Michigan educators and support them into the profession. Thank you.
Perfect. That's all we have to present for you today. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Rice.
Thank you, presenters. That was great. We appreciate that. Board members, questions or comments? Questions or comments? Typically, it takes us a little bit of time to get warmed up, but Ms. Lipton has had her cup of coffee for the morning. Ms. Lipton.
So thank you for that presentation. That was really, really helpful. And I would like to make a comment based on personal experience. By way of background, when I left the legislature, I started a nonprofit based on the Michigan Promise Zone model. I'm sure all of you are aware we have a number of tax capture promise zones around the state. The reason why I bring that up is that I would like for you all to consider the possibility, or at least to consider partnering or thinking about how the promise zones around the state could be helpful in some of your issue areas. And what I mean by that is the promise zones began by providing 2 years of community college scholarship to students. That was in their earliest phase. Now that we have matured and we are now providing this resource for 10 years now, we are much more moving into the concept of mentoring, success coaching, and really staying in touch with our students. And I think that when I think about how we've been able to have an effect on students, it's really very profound in the sense that we've taken out the issue of cost for our most economically distressed students. By way of background, our promise zones are in 15 of the most economically distressed communities in the state. That's a criterion. And through our success coaching model, we stay in touch with these students through their time in college. Why is that important? Because we are there to support students through all points of their college career, and that involves career counseling and mentoring. And I think that my impression of now being in this space for 6-8 years now and working with students, that teaching is something or a lot of students are not thinking about going into teaching, mainly because for a lot of our economically disadvantaged students, they need to go into a career that will make money for them. And so I think that the Promise Zone Association could be very, very helpful in some of these programs to bring students at a very early age, because we begin with them in high school, to start thinking about teaching as a noble profession, but also a profession whereby they could support a family. So I would urge the department to think about that as another opportunity for encouraging our young people, because we have these ready-made programs already around the state. I don't think it would be a complete answer, but it would be certainly a start in terms of touching students at a very critical age, at a very critical time. And I would be happy to talk to whomever. I'm very, very bullish on the Promise Zones. I'm very, very excited. And so I would be more than happy to talk to anyone or help facilitate that.
We would welcome the opportunity to speak with Promise Zones, and you and I talked on the phone the other night about this. I think it's a great idea. We recently spoke with the Urban Superintendents Association, Middle Cities in the state. There's a lot of overlapping membership, but yours is a direct link to students who could at some point become teachers. So it does have the opportunity to develop into a pipeline. We would welcome that. Thank you. Dr. Pugh, to you, and then Ms. Snyder.
If we could go back to the slide that talked about the reasons for teachers leaving the profession, or I think that was what it was entitled, where we were looking at the. Okay. And I'm sorry, if you could again tell me when the survey was administered. It
was administered during the 2019-2020 school year.
Okay. Okay, so we definitely may expect to see some differences in the time that we're in now on this. Any thoughts on what we're seeing now, or information that we're receiving anecdotally from teachers who are leaving the field now?
We have no global background. I mean, I'd be cautious about raising anecdotal information to the level of a picture of the profession in Michigan or in the country. Salaries continue to be an issue. We continue to hear salaries being an issue. We have encouraged, as you know, Dr. Pugh, the use of some of our ESSER funds for the improvement of salaries, if only on a non-recurring basis, because the ESSER funds themselves are non-recurring, and particularly at the low end of the salary schedule, as Kelly Cassidy points out, 41st in the country in average starting salary. It's not every district, as she pointed out later in the presentation. There are different starting salaries in different school districts, but on average, our teachers start out quite low for the professionals that we expect them to be. So we believe that this continues to be an issue, notwithstanding the fact that the study to which we cite is a year dated.
And I don't disagree with that at all. As a matter of fact, I've definitely heard that, and I continue to hear that. Let me say that. And I thought that I saw some data somewhere where we were also looking at teacher evaluation, and a big piece I think to add to salary is around teacher voice, teacher respect, just the morale from teachers not being heard. Teachers are going and they're getting educated to educate, and to know students and to know how to nurture and educate students, but their education isn't enough for lawmakers, decision makers to listen to them. And so I definitely am hearing that loud and clear. Lack of respect, lack of teachers being able to teach and educate students in the way that they know how to educate and teach. And often that they're teaching to a test. And in a year like COVID, where they're teaching to a test when they feel that it's not even a safe environment physically for their children to be in. And I've heard that loud and clear, and I think that that has to be captured somewhere. Because I think that it applies to COVID, but I think that there's a broader message there in that.
I think there is a voice issue. There's no question about that. You tend to hear that from veteran teachers, not so much from people looking at the profession from the outside, but rather looking at the profession from the inside. It's the people who have been teaching who can give voice to that issue of voice because they experience it on a daily basis. It's hard to know what you don't know. It's hard to know what's in the profession when you're not in the profession. You may know the salary, but other pieces are less clear. Well, voice we hear from veteran teachers is an issue, and the concern that the profession has become a profession that is decreasingly about children and increasingly about paper, and paper that doesn't necessarily serve children, but for other purposes. So I think you're right on. Voice is a major issue for veteran teachers. There's no question about that.
And I'll just add this, because as I look at the data, as I looked at the trends by race across the timeline, as I look at incoming teachers, as I look at the profession of education that was once a very proud profession in the Black community, and probably others, but I definitely know in my community, my family, if you don't have people who are talking up the profession, those seasoned teachers, and even worse, if you have parents and mentors. I know me in my own profession, if I didn't have anyone that was willing to mentor me and encourage me to go into the field because they just thought that it wasn't a respected profession, add on the salary, but then add on, to the point where someone's not even taking into consideration their health and well-being, let alone their voice to protect the children that they're serving. I think that veteran voice would have a huge impact on those coming into the profession. So I just want to
there's no question about that. Know that you may recall 2 years ago the MEA did a survey, and it indicated that I think it was done in collaboration with a couple of other groups, the MEA, the AFT Michigan, and PPA, but it essentially showed that educators, 3/4 of educators would not recommend the profession to their children. And I think to your point, that is a cautionary tale. And we need to work to recreate the profession before it was chipped away at, before it was denigrated in the state, in the country. Rebuild it up so that educators are not only proud of their work, but proud to recommend the field, the profession, the greatest profession, in my view, for their children. So that's a big concern. You're absolutely right.
And to your point about the data, that I shouldn't have said anecdotal data. There probably is some quantitative data that does exist that's post or somewhere here in COVID. I thought I've seen some that hopefully we could augment or either add as an appendices to this data.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Ms. Snyder.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Last year, I'll piggyback onto Ellen talking about her promise zone conversation. I wonder if you can connect the promise zones with those innovative grow your own programs that we're talking about here this morning, because I think that will help to address the #1 concern of teachers. If you are adjusting for inflation, you can also adjust in those areas, at least, for the idea that you're not paying a student loan, right? So definitely our income goes a lot farther when we don't have a car sized, or for some people, a house payment sized student loan. So if you're able to make those connections with those innovative programs that we're sort of rolling out, and really encouraging people, it's not just getting your feet wet now, it's the greater, larger conversation of success later if you so choose. And this might be the route that you take. And then I'm just thinking about what Pam said. A lot of the discussion around voice and respect is really key. Anytime you open up the floor to make sure everyone's voice is heard and there's truly respect there, it's a big deal. I do wonder where, that was lost. We talk a lot about standards, the implementation of standards when we take away professional innovation and educator assessment. It's a big deal. I can kind of cross-section that with being a nurse educator. One of the things we often tell people is that it doesn't matter how many tests you have or how many algorithms you have or how many this is what you should do next you have. The teacher and the child is the most, in the classroom, I should say, is probably I feel like that relationship has broken down. And I think it's a big deal when we say it's less about the kids. That's true. And then, another perspective is that all of these top-down politicized issues that come attached to grants can be a big deal. They divide teachers against kids, against parents, and I know that there may not be agreement there, but it feels like it's a big deal when it comes to teachers and respect in their voice. So the last thing I will say is lack of growth opportunities. I know that we may not have the exact data, but we do have some direction, as we've talked about it all year long, learning loss as a result of COVID. I don't know if there's a way that the department can really encourage educators to think about working one-on-one with students. I mean, if you want to leave the profession, if you're teetering on that, think about what is ahead. There are new opportunities to work one-on-one with students. And I'm hoping that we'll go in the direction that we focus on how to utilize our resources and encourage growth within the huge learning loss gap that we have. A lot of teachers might find it very rewarding to consider that a growth opportunity, which we obviously had before on some level, but it's unprecedented now. Just a few ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Snyder. Other board members, questions, comments, concerns? You can keep casting a wider net. Seeing no other calls for first bites. I see the second bite. I see the second bite. Ms. Lipton for the second bite.
One of the questions I have is, what would success look like in this area? I know it's one of our strategic plan goals, and just looking back at that chart from I think 2016 to today, in terms of the various races, ethnicities of teachers, my impression is that it's been pretty stagnant. Well, I guess stagnant isn't the right word. It's been pretty constant from 2016 to the current time, with the exception of one category where you said that Black educators increased by 1%, but the rest were pretty constant. So do we collectively have a sense of what success would look like? Because we've talked a lot about various ideas, and by the way, just anecdotally, to Board Member Snyder's point, I love the idea of intersectionality of programs as well. So as she was talking, I was thinking about, okay, where can we think about intersectionality of programs to really get to where we want to go? So I think that the ideas are there. I guess my question is, do we collectively, and we may not have an answer to this right now, but I would just encourage us to think about, do we know what success would look like? Do we have an idea of what success would look like, so that 5 years from now, whatever body is hearing this presentation would be able to have some expectation that those numbers won't be the same, that there actually would be some movement to the numbers. Do we collectively know where we want to be in 5 years? I just think that sometimes it's helpful to not only talk about solutions, but actually talk about what success in a particular area would look like.
More than a third of the children in the state are of color. 9/10 of the teachers in the state are white. And so as we move forward, we should aspire to have a teaching profession that resembles the student body, the collective student body within the state. That should be our goal over a period of time. It cannot be our 5-year goal. It's not achievable within the next 5 years. It will take a considerable period of time to change the teaching profession. This is not an issue in the state of Michigan, although it is. It's an issue across the country, and the issues that affect Michigan's teaching force are nestled in or nested within a broader set of issues that are national issues. And we have to address the national issues within our state. But what we want to do is we want a teaching force that begins to resemble more and more the students whom our teachers are teaching. So that's one. Two, aggregate numbers in the state are misleading because they can shroud differences across jurisdictions. So for example, the distribution of teachers of color in the state could be lumpy, and those distributions are in fact lumpy. They end up in particular communities. They're not sprinkled proportionately across the state. So you have some communities which are known to be diverse, which are known to hire teachers of color and to mentor teachers of color and to appreciate the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. And you have others that have no interest in diversity whatsoever. That's not my opinion. That's what's in the numbers. And we have a responsibility to work on not simply the issue broadly writ, but also the challenges of diversity in particular communities. Not simply those that educate significant percentages of children, but those that don't, and that nonetheless benefit from seeing teachers of color in the classrooms. I would like to point out that the 1 percentage point increase over 4 years in African American teachers, while inadequate, and while the 6.9% African American teachers in our state is inadequate, that increase over a period of 4 years is nonetheless a significant increase. It's not where we need to be, it's not where we want to be, but it is a significant increase over 4 years. And we believe that some of the efforts that we have, that we are pushing, the grow your own for support staff, the grow your own for students, those are fertile grounds for raising up a crop not only of additional educators, but also of more diverse educators. Think about support staffs and student bodies. They are more diverse than the field for which you are trying to develop people for. That is to say, the teaching profession. So the support staffs across the state, on average, more diverse than teaching workforces. Student bodies more diverse on average than teacher workforces. So to recruit not from the historic populations, but rather from populations of support staff and students in addition to the traditional pools, is to expand the diversity.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, but I just want to just be a little bit just more precise. I just want to, and again, there may not be an answer to this at this point, but when you set out goals and metrics, I do think it's important to, yes, have an idea of where you are, and also have an idea of where you want to be. So what I'm hearing is that the end goal at some unspecified point, and parenthetically, I do think that it's helpful to take a very, very large issue, like having a teaching force that reflects the diversity of the student body. That's what I'm hearing is where we're going with this. But then having some measurable goals that are a little bit more bite-sized along the way. So perhaps a 1% increase every 5 years is appropriate. I would just, again, I'm not looking for an answer, but just sort of urge this body to think a little bit more specifically about a measurable goal so that we can be proud when we do make those. I mean, not everything has to be doom and gloom. It could be, you know, we did these programs and we saw a 2% increase, you know, right. Yay us. But it's helpful to have a goal and then what I would call measurable chunks along the way that we can aspire to, so that we can know, are our efforts working? Do we need to brainstorm and think about other efforts? That's my point, is goals, measurable goals.
Yeah, it's a good point. And what I will tell you is it becomes more possible once we have a sense of the extent to which certain of our input efforts root.
Yes,
So
yes,
when
yes.
we have a better understanding of the extent to which we're able to grow your own programs for support staff, the extent to which we're able to grow your own programs for students, the extent to which we know that the legislature is putting in more recurring money for public education, the extent to which local school districts are using ESSER funds on the bottom of the teacher salary. To the extent that we know what's happening with some of the inputs, we're able to create intermediate goals for the outputs. Part of the problem is that we don't know, because we're at the beginning of many of these efforts. We don't know the extent to which they're going to root, and by extension, don't know what harvest they're going to bear. But I don't disagree at all. I think that there's a real value to walking up goals piece by piece by piece by piece. But you have to have a sense of what the inputs are going to generate before you determine what you might get in terms of outputs. Yeah. Ms. Snyder, back to you.
Just a suggestion. I don't know how much the department has reached out or maybe been involved with or aware of Rodney Robinson. He was 2019's National Teacher of the Year, and he has traveled the country and done exactly this in his own personal career. Amazing speaker to listen to, but he talks of exactly what we're talking of. And I imagine he has quite the plethora of experience in terms of what benchmarks would look like. To your point, Ellen, of what will it look like to actually grow? What are the specifics? I don't know. Are we connected with him at all, or could we get connected with him regarding specifics related to grow your own programs?
Yeah, I have not been connected with him. I don't know if anybody in the department has. We can certainly reach out to him.
I think he would be a worthwhile partner to try to reach out.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Other questions or comments of board members? Questions, comments of board members? Judy Pritchett. Tom McMillan.
Nope, I'm good.
Jason Strayhorn. Who says I'm not casting my net?
No.
President Albridge. Okay.
Fantastic job.
Okay. Casting my net once, twice, thrice. Presenters, that was terrific. Thank you very much. We appreciate your efforts. Lest the general theme not be lost. It's important that we do not control the destiny of the fate of the profession in the department. We are able to do certain discrete things to address the teacher workforce, supply and diversity thereof, but there are forces far bigger than the department at work that affect whether people want to go into the profession, want to stay in the profession, want to recommend the profession to their children, other relatives, other young people coming up. And those last slides that were presented on the REL Midwest study are very, very, very powerful. We would do well to listen to professionals in the field about what they are experiencing if we have an interest, and we do collectively, in rebuilding the profession. We can't underfund the profession and expect that people will flock to the profession. It used to be that Michigan paid its teachers better, and when we paid our teachers better, we had a greater supply of teachers. And that's not simply a just right supply of teachers, but we had choices of teachers. We were a net exporter of teachers in a state that has outstanding education prep institutions. And we are no longer a net exporter of teachers. We're a net importer of teachers. And that's in part a function of two sets of elements. One, the extrinsic rewards, and the other, the intrinsic rewards. The extrinsic being compensation and the like, the intrinsic being how do you feel about your profession, the issues of voice and choice, and the ability to have an impact on the profession and on young people whom you serve. We appreciate our presenters. Thank you very much. We'll pivot to our next presentation. Thank you very much, Leah and Rebecca and Kelly. Have a great day. The next presentation is on the American Rescue Plan template and state plan. Presenter for this item is Mr. Kyle Garant, Deputy Superintendent for Finance and Operations. There will be a PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Garant, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Rice, and good morning, board. Just share my screen here real quick. All right, everybody able to see it okay?
We see you.
Oh, well, that's not what we
There
want.
you go.
There we go.
There you go. You're good.
Oh. Am I still good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I tried to, just give me 1 second, because I did the full screen, because you guys can't see the full screen right now, can you? I apologize. Nope. Well, I apologize for this. Let me just give me 1 second here.
There you
Well,
go, Kyle.
I'm sorry. I've not had trouble with this before, and I don't know what's going on here.
We just had
We
full
see.
screen a second ago.
We had it a second ago.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we
Full
go.
screen.
All right. I apologize for that. Good morning again. Thank you for your patience. And thank you for the opportunity to present the American Rescue Plan template and state plan that is being required by the U.S. Department of Education as part of our ESSER 3 award. Dr. Rice shared a brief blurb with you during board briefs on Friday to give you a little bit of a high-level background as to the plan, and I'm happy to dive into a little bit more today and share the various pieces. So the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER 3 portion, provides nearly $122 billion to states and school districts. Michigan's allocation is approximately $3.72 billion. The stated purpose of the U.S. Department of Education for the use of these funds is to safely reopen and sustain safe school operations and maximize in-person instruction. As you may recall from the previous two rounds of ESSER funds, 90% of the law requires 90% of the overall award to be formula allocated based on the Title I Part A formula to LEAs. So in Michigan, that equates to nearly $3.35 billion. If a state chooses to you have a reserve, they're allowed to reserve up to 10%. The ARP ESSER 3 has a little deviation from the previous two rounds. of ESSER funding. If the state chooses to use a reserve, there are 3 categories in which the state must spend a certain percentage of those resources on. So 5% must be to provide evidence-based interventions aimed specifically at supporting academic impact of lost instruction time or foregone learning. 1% of the total must be allocated to use to support evidence-based summer programming. And 1% of the total allocation, reserve allocation, would need to be spent on evidence-based comprehensive after-school programs. Similar to those final 2 bullets are in line with what the previous 2 rounds of ESSER funding were allowed to do. A state may use up to 1/2 of 1% for administrative costs, and any remaining funds that's not allocated in that 90% school districts or part of the state reserve may be used for emergency needs as determined by the state to address COVID-19. On April 21st, the U.S. Secretary Miguel Cardona sent a letter to state school chiefs that included a state plan template that states must submit to access the remaining 1/3 of a state's funds under the ARP ESSER 3 fund. The state plan template is due to be submitted to the U.S. Department of Education on June 7th. As you'll note on the March 24th bullet, that's when states were given access to the initial 2/3 of their ARP ESSER 3 funds, which equated to $2.4 billion for Michigan. As you are aware, legislative action needs to happen in order to appropriate that funding for MDE to be able to award to school districts. Diving into the template itself, the application template has 7 sections, which in turn have 22 parts states must write to. A team of MD staff is collaborating to complete the extensive state plan template. This plan is meant to be an aspirational plan meant for states to use and reassess during the next 3+ years of ESSER 3 funds as they are available to states and LEAs over that time period. MD is partnering with EPIC and Michigan State University to collect a limited amount of key stakeholder feedback prior to the submission date. And I will talk a little bit more about that shortly. So I'm going to dive briefly into each of the 7 sections. Section A, describing the state's current status and needs. There are 5 key areas to this portion of the template. Most notably, the overall priorities and school operating status. The ed asks states to describe the impact of the pandemic on school operating status, how that impacts disparities in specific student populations. We are fortunate through our partnership with CEPI and EPIC over the last year to be able to have a robust data collection to be able to respond to this question and to share in more detail than other states, as I've been on national calls over the last 3 weeks, that states are struggling with this section specifically. So I think we're well positioned to be able to address this portion thanks to the work of our partners and department staff over the last year in this area. Section B, safely reopening schools and sustaining their safe operation, asks states to describe how the state education agency will support its LEAs implementing to the greatest extent practicable prevention and mitigation policies in line with the most up-to-date guidance from the CDC. Furthermore, the SEA must describe how it will ensure that LEAs post the plan required by the ARP Act and periodically review no less than every 6 months and revise as appropriate their plans. Plans must describe the extent to which the LEA has adopted policies on the strategies described in CDC guidance. As you know, Board, our school districts have worked hard to implement public health mandates and guidance provided by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and their local health departments over the last 16 months. Which in turn, those resources were based on CDC guidance. Section C, planning for the use and coordination of ARP ESSER funds. The SCA consultation section requires states to provide a description of engagement and incorporation of that feedback into the plan. MD is fortunate to have a wealth of stakeholder feedback that was gathered during the development of Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan. During the plan's stakeholder engagement process, 47 separate interviews were conducted and nearly 12,000 surveys were collected from a diverse group of education stakeholders and practitioners from across the state. We are also gleaning pertinent information from numerous partner meetings that Dr. Rice and other MD staff have conducted during the pandemic. Finally, we are partnering with EPIC and MSU to conduct a feedback survey of educational partners, tribal education directors, and regional teachers of the year prior to the plan submission on June 7th. Section D, maximizing state level funds to support students, asks states to describe how they will utilize state set aside resources should they choose to utilize the SCA's ability to reserve up to 10% of the state's ESSER 3 award to implement evidence-based interventions that will respond to students' academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs. Again, board, as you know, we need legislative action to have access to these resources to be able to get those to school districts. Currently, House Bill 4421 is a supplemental appropriations bill that includes ESSER 3 funds. This bill proposes using the 10% set aside state reserve, amount to provide a per pupil equalization payment for districts receiving less than $1,093 per pupil through their district's ESSER 3 formula allocation. There's still a lot of work and negotiations happening in the legislature to come to a final appropriations bill to send to the governor, but should this proposal continue as is, the legislature will have essentially made the decision for us on what we will be using the 10% reserve money to support school districts. Section E, supporting LEAs and planning for and meeting the needs of students. This section requires just SEAs to provide a description on what the SEA's requirement for LEA plans is going to be, the extent to which districts' LEAs will use their funds to implement prevention and mitigation strategies. There's also a requirement in the ARP law, ARP ESSER 3 law, that requires LEAs to use 20% of their formula allocation to address the academic impacts of lost instructional time or foregone learning through evidence-based interventions. This is a change from ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. There was no requirement on districts to spend their use a certain percentage of their monies to address certain needs of students and families in their district. Section F, supporting the educator workforce, requires states to describe how they are addressing shortages of educators and other school personnel, as well as providing assistance with identification of most urgent shortages and actions to fill anticipated gaps. States must also describe how they are working to increase student access to key support staff within school buildings, such as school counselors, special education personnel, school social workers, and psychologists. The Proud Michigan Educator program, Grow Your Own programs, and alternative route programs described in Director Breen's presentation this morning, as well as state funding streams like Section 31N funding to support the hiring of children's mental health professionals will be incorporated here. And finally, in Section G, monitoring and measuring progress asks states to describe how they will ensure that SCA and LEA have the capacity to collect data for future reporting requirements. States must also describe their plans to ensure fiscal safeguards, monitoring capacity, and providing technical assistance to LEAs. While USED has not published final guidance on data collection requirements for both state education agencies or local school districts, Based on the application template and the interim final rule published by USED, we anticipate there will be an increase in the amount of data USED will require as part of reporting on ESSER 3 funds and the use of those funds. And with that, I thank you for your patience with my technical difficulties, and we'll turn it back over to Dr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Garant. Questions from board members? President Aldrich.
Yeah, can you give a little more information on the legislature's suggestion for a per pupil equalization fund? What exactly is that? Who would be impacted by it? Just a little more information.
Sure. So you may remember, Dr. Aldrich, in the previous round of the ESSER 2 money, there was a similar proposal that impacted about 215 school districts in our state that received a per pupil amount that was under $450, if I remember correctly. And so this proposal would do the same, except given the tripling in size of the amount of money that states are getting under ESSER 3, the per pupil cap is raised to $1,093. So essentially districts that are receiving less than $1,093 per pupil in their ESSER formula, or the 90% of their formula allocation through the Title 1A Part formula, Title 1 Part A formula, excuse me, would be eligible to receive these dollars. And like the supplemental appropriation previous this year, there are requirements on in-person learning as part of accessing those dollars. So it's a very similar structure that we saw as part of the supplemental appropriations bill in March. So it's very similar to what we've seen already. Again, that bill was just passed out of the House. There needs to be work in conference committee with the Senate to be able to come to a finalized bill. So nothing is in stone yet, but that's the House proposal at this point.
So this is based on Title I funding formula. So if you have fewer students, say, that fall within that Title I criteria, then you would get additional funding. Is this based on district or is it based on school?
It's based on district.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, President Aldrich. We move to Dr. Pugh and then Dr. Pritchett.
Thanks, Kyle, for the presentation. I guess some of my questions, well, I'll wait, but some of my questions have to do with where are we with the previous ESSER funding, and you brought that up. And I guess for ESSER 3, when we do this equalization, where does that funding come from? Number one. Number two, where are we with the previous ESSER funding? And then I have follow-up questions on addressing the COVID needs and any other airborne disease, or just addressing the decades-old issues that we have with buildings. I have questions about that too. So I guess maybe I'll just break it off into the first part, and then I'll go to the building needs.
Sure. I'll see if I can check them all off the list here, Dr. Pugh. But in response to your first question around ESSER 1 and 2, all of the ESSER 1 funds have been awarded to districts. They are spending those down throughout this school year. As you'll remember, for all 3 rounds of the ESSER money, there is the award year that the money comes in that districts have to spend it, and they also do the federal tidings amendment. Essentially have a carryover year, a year after that, to spend those monies. So these monies, the ESSER 1 monies, will be available to districts through September 30th of 2022. As it relates to ESSER 2, you may recall that in the supplemental appropriations that were passed in March and that the governor signed, it only 43% of that award was approved, and so we've awarded 43% of those resources to districts already. 57% of that award was tied into the requirement that the governor forgive or foregone her pandemic order ability, and she vetoed it. So that money still needs to be appropriated by the legislature.
Okay. All right, so then let me work my way up to ESSER 3.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we have funds that are withheld. So districts have not received all of the ESSER $2 that were allocated by the previous administration under the Trump administration. So now we have ESSER $3 that are available to go to districts, but we have to wait for the legislature to allocate those funds to, and it sounds like it's held up on this equalization piece.
I wouldn't say that's necessarily held up on that piece. That is a piece I think of significant conversation, but it's the appropriation of those dollars are being held up, I think, based on other factors. But it's working its way through the appropriations process, which again, the feds gave us access to this money in March, and we are still awaiting legislative action to appropriate those dollars.
And the stipulation that was applied by Senator Stabenow, because of the ESSER $2 that were held up in Michigan, does that apply here? Or I think that there was 60 days, 90 days that the money had to go out. Was that from the federal to the states, or is that to get to the locals?
I don't know if I saw Dr. Rice. I don't know if you wanted to say, but so that there was language in the ARP bill that was more encouraging in nature. It wasn't a must. That, but you are correct that there was a 60-day requirement of states to allocate monies to their local districts within 60 days, and but it wasn't a must. It wasn't a requirement of state legislatures to do that.
Because we've already missed that timeline, right?
Yes,
okay.
We have. Yeah.
All right, and then I guess I can let Judy. I guess my other question, I guess, to the ESSER $3 and this equalization piece. Now, and you answer part of it with Cassandra, but like, how can you just explain that a little bit better? Like, how does that work? Does it mean that it removes funds from another district, or to make? Okay.
No. So what? So again, it's a good question though. The 90% has to be allocated out to districts based on the Title I Part A formula, and that equates to just shy of $3.35 billion. And then with the SEA reserve that the law allows states to reserve up to 10% of the funding. So in ESSER 1, we did that, and Dr. Rice and the department created the Education Equity Fund with that 10% money. So in this case, the legislature is using that 10% set aside, which equates to $372 billion or $372 million. They are using that 10% set aside to fund the equalization payment. So districts are getting their full 9% award, and under the House proposal, the bill would allow or would give some districts who don't meet that 1,093 per pupil allocation additional resources through that 10% reserve.
Okay, so that's what you meant when the legislature will have answered the question for us, how we spend versus in ESSER 1, where Dr. Rice had the liberty to come up with the formula. Okay, I have other questions, but I'll let Judy jump in and then I'll come back.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dr. Pugh. Dr. Pritchett, to you.
Thank you. And Dr. Pugh, you actually asked some of the questions I had, but I just am going to make some statements, Kyle, and if I'm wrong, stop me, okay?
Okay. All right.
ESSER $2, we still have 57% that have not been allocated?
Correct.
50%, okay. ESSER $3, 90% of that money, basically it's been decided, is formula based, but it has not been released yet because we're waiting for determination on that additional 10%. Is that correct? So the department can't even release that 90% Title I dollars formula to districts at this point. So everything's being held, waiting a determination on the 10%, which is over in the legislature right now, heading to the Senate, from what I just heard you say. Okay, I'm okay. I'm correct on that one.
If I can, Dr. Pritchett, if I could just add one piece that we did, we have shared the estimated formula allocations with districts to, understanding that there would be a legislative process, but still giving districts an idea of what they would be receiving to help continue local planning of how to use those resources.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, and then section G of the state plan that the department has to submit to the feds by June 7, the data collection. I believe what I heard you say is the U.S. Department of Ed has not given the department any real specifics yet on what data collection what data they're actually going to be looking for. But am I right to assume, or maybe not, that would be data that would be collected after the money is expended, or data that's going to be collected during the time, money is being expended? Or do you even have that detail?
Not through tea leaves, essentially, Dr. Pritchett. Okay. I think it's a both and. As far as how the money is used would be reporting that would happen after resources are spent. Based on, again, the application template and the interim final rule. Ed is asking a lot of questions about the modality in which students and districts are providing education in your state, and down to a subgroup population level. And so, we're anticipating that we're going to have to collect information from districts, or that Ed is going to ask us questions around those modalities, again, down to student subgroup level. So that's one area I feel relatively confident in that we will have to collect data in. But that would be something that would be over time of the plan, and not necessarily at the end of a year when resources have been spent on programs and services.
Okay. One more question. This ESSER 3 money is separate from a district's, and I'm going to use the word normal because I can't think of a better word right now, Title I dollars. If I'm in a local district and I have done my Title I plan, submitted it to Michigan Department of Ed, I pretty much know what that funding is going to be at this point and have a pretty good expectation of when I will receive that, depending on when my plan gets approved, correct? So this is separate money. Yes. Because it's under ESSER. This process that we just talked about is not holding up that money at all. That's running through the way it normally does for districts. So at least they have that assurance of, okay, this is what we can count on this. And we have a sense of what monies we will receive from ESSER 3. We're just not real sure when that's going to happen.
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Just a note on the 90%, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. ESSER 1, of course, completely allocated by the legislature. ESSER 2, 43% allocated. ESSER 3, not at all allocated. But we've encouraged local school districts to plan relative to those 90% disbursements that they know will be coming as a matter of federal law. You can plan on those for the next 3 years. You do not have to wait for the legislature to appropriate those dollars, for us to allocate those dollars, for you to begin to plan to spend those dollars. That planning should have begun and has begun in many districts across the state, completely legitimately. So they can plan. In the meantime, the dollars will be liberated in the coming month or couple of months, and they'll be able to move forward. In the meantime, we don't anticipate a point when local school districts are going to be out dollars waiting for the legislature to act. That's somewhat different from the coming year budget. The coming year budget is an issue. You are talking about recurring dollars, not the non-recurring dollars from the ESSER funding, the federal ESSER funding, not the equity payments that are from a state supplemental. We are talking about a budget. We are talking about recurring dollars. It is really critical that the legislature pass a budget soon so that local school districts know their recurring dollars moving into the coming school year. That's a big piece. And as you know, Dr. Pritchett, from your experience as an educator, it's important that local school districts know that in the planning for budgets which are required on or before June 30th. So we've encouraged people, don't wait on the 90% determination by the state legislature. You know that's formula driven by Title I Part A formula. Go ahead, plan for it, and by the time you're finished your planning, the dollars will be liberated. Local school districts are still working on the spending of their ESSER 1 money, not on their ESSER 2, but rather on their ESSER 1 money. So really the biggest issue, we want the liberation of the federal dollars, absolutely, but we particularly want in a timely fashion, that is to say in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we want those that fiscal year 22 budget wrapped up by the state legislature. Yeah, thank you. Ms. Lipton, to you.
Yes. The question I have is, in this ESSER 3 portion of the presentation, where you talked about 10% of the dollars that are going to be used for the equalization payment, it strikes me that and just correct me if I'm wrong, one of the pillars of the department's top 10 strategic plan is adequate and equitable funding. Mm-hmm. It strikes me that this particular legislative proposal runs afoul of that, in the sense that it appears to be driving resources to it seems to be driving resources toward districts that are by nature serving less of our neediest students, as opposed to driving resources to districts that are serving our neediest students. And I understand that it's a 10% carve out, but am I understanding that correctly? That they're running at cross purposes?
They are running in sync in a fashion with one another, although I understand your point, and I think it's a legitimate point. I think you have to really understand the Title I Part A formula. The Title I Part A formula is a defensible formula, an easily defensible formula for the distribution of annual Title I Part A funds. It gives more money to needier districts, less money to less needy districts, and it is a defensible formula for the distribution of compensatory education dollars. It is somewhat less defensible for the distribution of pandemic relief dollars, because pandemic relief dollars really have two elements to them. One, the pandemic, which affects all communities across the United States, irrespective of demographics. And then beyond that, an equity component. The distribution of pandemic relief funds based on Title I Part A formula is enormously lumpy and results in some districts, would result in some districts getting little to nothing whatsoever in terms of per pupil increases. And so what the legislature has decided, not with respect to ESSER 1, but with respect to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, is that there has to be some measure of balancing. The balancing will be incomplete because 90% of the funding is enormously weighted in the spirit of our 8th state strategic education goal, Ms. Lipton, to which you refer, adequate and equitable school funding, enormously weighted in that regard. And some districts would argue far too much so. The 10% can't begin to make equal, nor does it begin to try to make equal. It simply acknowledges that all districts need some additional money year to year. It is in no way, shape, or form mathematically, statistically capable of turning on its head the equity spirit of that 8th state strategic education plan goal. So I understand your question. It's a good question, but the math of it is that that 10% can't turn on the head the distribution of 90% of the dollars, and those 90% dollars are very lumpily distributed. We could give you more details on that, but suffice it to say, we understand your point. It's a good point. If we were talking about a far greater percentage of the dollars, it might be a different story, but 10% can't profoundly turn 90%. I mean, that's just the straight math of it.
Okay. So that was, so basically there was, what I'm hearing you say is that there wasn't a huge need to educate the legislature about the need for a more robust funding formula that is one based on equity, or basically that this is probably not the right place to advocate for an equitable funding formula, a more equitable funding formula. That particular education may need to happen at a later date, perhaps.
So it was Dr. King who said something to the effect of the time is always right to do what is right. And so I'm never going to argue against a moment to argue for right and for equity. I'm never going to argue against that moment. But we are talking about non-recurring federal dollars in a pandemic. Those districts which have been historically adversely affected from a funding perspective are better treated on average by the pandemic relief distribution formula, Title I Part A formula, in ESSER 1, 2, and 3. This simply provides a little bit of funding to make sure that everybody gets some in a pandemic. It is by itself defensible. Now, that said, that's on non-recurring dollars, short period of time. The issue about the recurring funding formula in the state of Michigan, that equity issue remains, that fight remains, that fight is going to continue to be engaged. It is a fight that is, if you will, in the midst of a pandemic, in the presence of these enormous federal dollars, somewhat set aside for the moment. But that issue of the adequacy and equity of recurring education dollars in the state of Michigan, that is a pending issue still to be fought.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that
Yeah.
clarification.
You bet. Dr. Pugh.
And that is good clarification. I do know that I believe we had legislators within our state or folks within our state who were trying to undo the Title I for the 90%, but that holds intact, and nothing's going to be, I mean, our Title I school districts get that funding. Good questions, and thank you for that dialogue. You know, I want to, and I'm happy that the legislature was able to that works out for us. It sounds like it does. I guess I am still concerned, disheartened to say the least, that we are still holding up 50%, 7% of the funds. Yes, schools can plan, but listening to the districts, they want to know that the funding is coming their way. Teachers and parents and students want to know that children are not being used as bargaining chips, and unfortunately that still is happening here. And you know, we could go into the whole discussion about the pandemic powers and the fact that they weren't even exercised at a time when they needed to be exercised, but I will move on. But it's a point that I do want to raise because it is a concern for me, and it is angering, and it's real, and the fact that it still is real just boils my blood. And so I could say more. I'll stop. I guess a couple of questions that I have with the House Bill 4048. I never heard like what schools were harmed as a result of that coercion we're sending students into school at a time when we know that it was harmful. Were there schools that were harmed by that? Is a question. And I guess I'll pause there, and then I have a question about the ESSER $3 too.
Sure. Mr. Garant, your thoughts on I think, Dr. Pugh, if I, perhaps to reshape that question a smidge, your interest is of the slightly more than 200 districts that received ESSER II equity payments. That is to say, they weren't at $450 or more per child in federal dollars. So they received an equity payment. Of those 215 districts, what number of them moved their schedule in an effort to be eligible for those dollars? Is that the question-ish?
Right, eligible for those critical dollars.
Yes. Right. No, I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
I know.
Okay, fair enough. Yep. So Mr. Garant, do you have because I know that we had kind of lowered that down to a pretty small number. Your thoughts on the universe?
I would want to follow up with Catherine and Epic because I think they can give us a more detailed number. But anecdotally, not anecdotally, the majority of districts at that time were planning to have some level of in-person. Locally here in Ingham County, there were districts that had to add a little bit of time to be able to meet that mandate, or had to start their back to school a week early in order to meet that requirement. So I think that the universe is very small of those that had to make drastic changes to what they were planning on their instructional modality, and that the majority of those 215 districts already met that threshold that was in that required to access those dollars. But I can follow up with Catherine Strunk and Epic and SEPI and get a more detailed response for you.
Thank you. Because I guess my thought there is, if there is one district, after we saw the results of schools going into class at a most critical time for many reasons. One is that we needed to get over the spring break season. But my thoughts are that we didn't have one that fell victim to that horrible decision and law by the legislature that I know we had to implement. I mean, it was our responsibility to implement and act on. And I guess my question would be if there is one, if there's any thoughts now looking back, hindsight, on what we saw as far as the data, children showing up in hospitals, parents showing up in hospitals, and our death rate just, finally leveling off. So that's one thought that I have. I would really want to, once I hear that, I would like to hear more about what that's going to look like. And then my other question, getting back to the ESSER $3 as it relates to COVID, it was just May 7th that the CDC finally admitted that that COVID is airborne. SARS-CoV-2 is airborne, and I know this doesn't, it's not much that we can do here, but my hope is that someone will be able to impress upon Secretary Cardona and the U.S. Department of Ed to put more guidance around how we spend funding to protect our children from the spread of the disease, which and the virus that still is living. And when we look at vaccination rates for certain populations, our numbers have not budged a whole lot. And when we look at it for our children, in particular, our vaccination rates have not budged. So not a lot has changed. So I'm just hoping that we're able to provide more guidance on ventilation and making buildings safer for children and reducing the risk of exposure. And that's not adequately done. And that's not necessarily here on the state level. More needs to be done on the U.S. Department of Ed level, but I do know that the guidance that has been provided and that the requirements were written prior to the CDC finally coming on board with the other scientists and admitting that COVID is airborne.
Well, I think to your point, this could be really a generational shift for us, a multi-generational shift. You put in place a new mechanical system. That new mechanical system can last 40 or 50 years. And it has the potential to be of benefit to 3 or 4 generations of students in a school. And a lot of us know the joy of teaching in schools with inadequate heating, no air conditioning, poor ventilation, windows that don't open or don't open well, or open but don't stay open, or non-windows, windows nailed shut, windows walled off. There were all sorts of brilliant ideas that were done in the interest of conservation, but not necessarily in the interest of public health over a period of years. And we need to rethink those in 2021, in part to your point, given COVID, but in part simply because of what we know about best practices for human buildings for human beings in buildings. They need the airflow. They need cooler temperatures in the spring and into the summer. They need the warmer temperatures in the winter, and it's very, very hard to learn if you don't have appropriate climate control. Very hard to learn. So I think this can be an opportunity to address things that we probably should have addressed long ago, and this can be an impetus or a lever to get some really important things accomplished in that regard.
And I will totally agree with everything you said, and I just don't want to miss the urgency of it as well, because a lot of the studies that are put forward are speaking to schools, and this isn't in the, it's in the fine print, but it's not boldly out there. It doesn't speak to that school's condition in comparison to a majority of some of the schools that we're talking about. And so we also know that only less than 4% of Black population, less than 2% of Latino population, less than 0.3% of Native American populations in Michigan have received their vaccine. And then that's, if we look at children, that's going to be reduced. So there is an urgency. There's more crowding in some of these school districts, and we just talked about educator shortages, on and on and on. So there is an urgency to it, but it is definitely addressing decades of decay and neglect in buildings. And then, fellow board members have talked about moving forward and making sure that we don't see another COVID. So as well as, other illnesses that can be caused by these issues that we're bringing up. So there is definitely an urgency there to it.
You should know that we met with the urban superintendents. We raised directly this issue of health, safety, and wellness, our third state strategic education plan goal, and raised specifically the changing out of old mechanical systems, the replacement of windows. We said, look, there are a lot of things around ESSER $3 that are unclear. What isn't unclear is the ability to change out a mechanical system with ESSER dollars, or for that matter, to put in place windows or functional windows. It's hard for people to understand the notion of functional windows. They think that it's a redundancy. But if you've been in particular schools, you know well that it's not a redundancy, it's a reality. And it's an outrage how we treat particular human beings. And I agree with you. I would simply say this, though, about urgency, and not that you don't already know this, but if we decide today to replace a mechanical system, given the way schools operate, you plan in one summer for the replacement of that mechanical system in the following summer, because you just don't have the opportunity, given as disruptive a process as it is, to do that during the school year. So it really is a 12 to 14 month process, even done on an urgent basis. So I just share that with you, and I'm sure you're cognizant of that. Yeah.
And I'll just add, I probably should add this here. I had the opportunity to talk to the CEO of the International Well Building Institute yesterday, and they do that well building seal. You've probably, the commercials coming on all the time. There's Jennifer Lopez, there's, you guys name them all. They're there. And so my question to them, as my question has been here, how are we working with schools? Now, they do have a product that they mentioned. I'm not as interested in the product as I am with their checklists and the things that they're doing to certify buildings. But to your point, Dr. Rice, is making sure that we have the professionals in place to get all of these things in order, because again, we're talking about having teachers in buildings, and we know that that's a high priority that's hard to come by. But if there's anything that we can do for our children, because we're talking about businesses having this seal and certificate, but if there's anything that we can do there, and I would love to hear, I know we talked about this in a previous meeting about hearing more from Eagle and DHHS around how buildings are seeking out assessments and how they're moving forward and making sure that they are doing. I know a lot of districts are doing patchwork and short-term fixes, but just making sure that we are thinking long-term. And again, having this resource of like a well building or that International Well Building Institute, that hopefully we could look at something like that as well, but hoping that the U.S. Department of Ed find the wherewithal to do all they can from that angle to now really think these things through from a health perspective, and that they see the urgency in it as well. But I do get your point. Planning starts now for this urgent issue.
Well, we'll be tracking within the department the extent to which districts use funds, ESSER funds, for particular purposes, including but not limited to the issue of changing out mechanical systems and windows. We've recommended 7 uses of these funds, among others. They are in 4 of the 7 cases associated with our state strategic education plan goals: the expansion of early childhood education, the improvement of early literacy, the addressing of health, safety, and wellness, and the addressing of the teacher shortage, goals 1, 2, 3, and 7. And so we will be tracking that. We have urged local school districts around this. We could benefit from additional urging from USED. We could also benefit from the package that's being debated in Congress now around infrastructure. However you define infrastructure, even if you define it as narrowly as imaginable or as expansively as imaginable, it includes mechanical systems in schools. And we really do need to address this. This has been a long time coming. And again, some of us have lived our lives in these schools. They can be pretty grim for our young people, and we know the difference between some sort of a school that's out of a Charles Dickens novel on the one hand, and something that's modern and light and airy and fresh, that young people take pride in and that they want to come to and to learn in, and. Ms. Lipton, to you.
Yes, thank you. I'll just begin with a comment that I'm sure this body knows that Michigan is in a minority of states that does not have a dedicated or separate funding for school infrastructure. We are an outlier in that regard. If you want to look at how we compare to other states in the country. So I would just urge people to, reflect upon that and how that may be adversely impacting our goal, 2 of our goals in terms of health, safety, and welfare of our young people, as well as providing an adequate and equitable resourced educational opportunity. In terms of my question, I just want to go back to the actual logistics of submitting this information to USDOE. So my understanding is that the template must be completed by June 7th, and it sounds as though we're well on our way to meeting that. My question is, from the standpoint of receipt of that template, is this sort of a check the box from the standpoint of USDOE in terms of, okay, you have to complete this and then you're all good, or is there going to be some sort of up and back criticism, reflection? Because my larger question is, can you give me some information about what the purpose of this template is supposed to be, so that I can better understand how it fits into what we're trying to do?
So, I mean, the first and foremost is, we have to, is the access to the additional third of our ESSER 3 money, that this is the kind of lever that once we complete gets us access to those additional funds. Right underneath that is USED's desire to want to better understand what states are doing and what districts are doing to support schools and students in recovering from the pandemic. And then given the sizable amount of these dollars, how those dollars are being spent to address those needs and priorities within states. And again, I mentioned earlier, they are very keen on understanding instructional modalities, especially for underserved populations. And so, I think that's another key point or wondering from the U.S. Department of Education as part of this template is, again, gathering additional information and understanding what states are doing in response to recovering from the pandemic. And then the next level down is how are they using the resources that Ed is giving as part of these ESSER funds to address those needs.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand. So what I'm hearing from you is that the exercise is to help them understand these 2 points. Do we expect to get any feedback from them in terms of this state did it well, this state didn't do it well, or is it really more of in the process of putting together this template, we should be reflecting on how we're accomplishing these goals? Is it self-reflection, or is it them coming back to us and reflecting for us, or is it a combination? And if it's a combination, do we feel comfortable that the self-reflection piece is on track as well?
So Ed will, our understanding is Ed will be reviewing states' templates and will be providing feedback. So I think there will be some sort of reflection and response period with states on answering those questions. I know Ed is eager to use information from states to promote promising and research-based practices among states. So I think as part of this collection of information, they will identify, promising practices and a whole host of areas around responding to the pandemic that they will kind of uplift and promote to states as options for addressing certain issues with responding to the pandemic. But to your initial point, there will be an assessment and an evaluation reflection period. And I think I mentioned during the presentation that there is an expectation of Ed that states will and LEAs will review and revise their plans over the period of the use of these dollars over the next 3 years to, again, be cognizant of relooking at where things stand and if there needs to be course correction on, how districts are using their resources.
Oh, yes, you did. Thank you. Right. Every 6 months there has to be. Okay. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lipton. Other questions from other board members? Going once, going twice. Mr. Strayhorn, Mr. McMillan.
Nope, I'm good.
Can't blame a guy for trying. It's that old teacher in me. Okay. Hearing and seeing none, Mr. Garan, thank you very much. Thank you, board, for an interesting and thorough conversation. We are at that point in the board agenda for the discussion on board norms. President Albridge.
Thank you. So we've allotted a little time for this. I'm not sure if we will necessarily need this or not. I just wanted to kind of throw an idea out there to the rest of the board. We do have 2 new board members, and as you know, we've been operating in a very new environment for quite a while now. And I think it might be a good time to discuss and maybe develop a shared set of board norms and or principles to help guide some of the work that we're doing. Effective boards generally have a set of norms that govern everything from expected behavior to how we facilitate our work and enable the board to kind of accomplish the goals that we have. Examples could be, coming to the meeting prepared, being on time, how we develop the agenda, when and how to communicate during board meetings. And the thing is, I think most of these already exist. I think we are already operating under a lot of board norms, but they're not explicit and they're not written. And so I think when we have a situation like we have now, where we're operating in different spheres, or we have 2 new board members come on, you know, I think it would just be easier to have something in place that, so it's not kind of like learning by being thrown into the fire pit, if you will. And so, you know, if we decide to approve something, you know, obviously we can do it at a board meeting, but I was thinking to begin with, you know, perhaps we can have a couple meetings, you know, small group meetings, maybe even have an outside facilitator come in. But, you know, I'm open to whatever the group decides. I just think it might be helpful for us to come up with a set of principles or norms that we can operate under. And so that's it. I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea and see what you guys thought about that.
Okay, the idea is up for discussion. Anybody care to share?
Well, I guess I'm just curious, can you give an example? Like, I understand being on time, but, you know, do you have a proposal or a list of these things? These norms?
I do not. I think it's something that the board should come up with as based on how we want to function as a board. But I can tell you, I have seen other boards that have board norms, and they're not extensive. They're you know, just basically based on, we're going to come, you know, like I said, we'll come to the board meeting prepared. We commit to be on time. You know, we already have one on how we set our agenda, that we have a separate meeting, and we have you know, people take part in that. But I also think there's a few things that have come up recently where we're always kind of questioning, like, what is the standard? For example, if someone wants to bring, you know, a separate motion, do you put that on the agenda that day? You know, if you wanted the board to consider a policy statement or a resolution, how far in advance should you send that out, you know, ideally to the rest of the board? I just think these are things that, you know, so there's no surprises, essentially. Those are my ideas.
I think it's a fantastic idea. And I'll just say, speaking for myself, you know, I tend to like to know, you know, what the rules of engagement are. And so, for example, you know, I didn't know that every board member could, you know, come to the agenda planning meeting. I was not aware. I mean, I wasn't appointed to that committee, and so I didn't know that it was, you know, okay for me to come. And then when I did come, I was like, am I just listening in? You know, am I a participant? So just speaking for myself, there have been times where I didn't know, you know, if I had an idea, who do I bring it to? Is there some, you know, idea committee that sort of vets ideas? I didn't know, and I guess I still have questions in terms of, you know, how do we decide presentations, for example? And so I sort of gleaned from listening in on another meeting that, and I agree with this, but I think this might, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but it would be helpful to know. So for example, I think it was at an agenda planning meeting where someone made the point that, you know, it's really not appropriate to have a vendor make a presentation at a board meeting. And, you know, by golly, that makes so much sense. But it seems like a small thing, but you know, all of us are hearing and reading about different ideas and thinking, oh, let's do a presentation. Well, maybe that's really not the appropriate vehicle. Maybe the appropriate vehicle is, you know, an idea committee. I'm not saying that we need another committee. I'm just saying that the idea of the rules of engagement, I think, are very, very helpful, because I think it would help us all be more effective and be better advocates. I had a question about social media. I don't want to dominate this conversation at all, so I'll just stop there. But I did, you know, have a question. Does the department have a Facebook account, a Twitter account? You know, some of us use social media, and it might be helpful for us to be able, as state board members, to amplify certain great news about what we're doing. Again, but without really having some norms, my head, I don't want to do anything that's, you know, not right, so I tend to just not do anything. But I think it would be very helpful. is my general vote for that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lipton. Ms. Snyder.
Sorry, I'm just looking through Robert's Rules of Order, just because it sounds like that's what you're referring to outside of our own bylaws for the board. But I guess I would just be curious in terms of what specific things we would want to introduce, and if it's not already covered by what governs boards in general. And the only reason why I suggest that is because, Ellen, I'm just looking for social media in terms of whether or not it addresses that. But instead of doing it on our own, if you will, not that we can't or that we shouldn't or that we haven't with our own bylaws, but is it helpful for other boards to be able to engage with what we already use as the foundation of governing our communication and our structure and our way of work? Jump in if you so choose on what I'm saying. Because I know there are Robert's Rules of Orders on making a motion to amend agendas, which we always do. Is that something we want to change? What do we want to change about it? So like Tom, I guess I would want to know, what are the specific examples of what we want to do that deviates from what we already have?
Well, Nikki, I think that's the point of having small groups come together and talk about it, is that's really up to us. And part of the norm could simply be, we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order. But because that does lay out kind of what Ellen's talking about, engagement. Obviously, that is not going to impact questions about social media and things like that. But that is precisely what I'm recommending, that, you know, groups can come together and talk about, do we want to follow directly Robert's Rules of Order? Because I think we do on occasion go around that, and we do things differently. We might say, for example, you know, someone might bring a statement to the board table. You know, the question is, and I don't know if this is addressed in Robert's Rules of Order or not, but how far in advance should board members have access to something like that, so that we can make informed decisions? Those, I don't think, are necessarily in Robert's Rules of Order, but are, you know, practices that we as a board can agree on, so that, you know, to Ellen's point, there aren't, you know, people do understand, what can I do, what should I do, how should I do it, you know, just so they're norms. They're not, you know, we're not creating law, we're not creating policy, for example. We're simply saying, in an ideal world, this is how we think we should operate. And it's completely up to us as a board how we want to do that.
So would you be willing then to email the whole board what norms you're proposing? This isn't necessarily discussion that Tom or I are proposing, or again, I don't know who's proposing it, what they're proposing, as opposed to getting together as a group. That's sort of like an arbitrary, let's come together and talk about whatever. But let's have an agenda. Let's know what you're proposing in advance, I guess.
Yeah, no,
What you're requesting.
I am not proposing anything other than we have a conversation as board members about what we would like to see. That's all we're talking about today.
I think it's fair for me to suggest that we know what that conversation would look like before.
What would you like it to look like, Nikki?
Well, I'm not proposing that we have it. So that's what I'm saying is that what kind of conversation do we want to have?
And I'm pushing that back on the board. Do you even want to have the conversation? If the answer is no, then we'll continue to operate the way that we've been operating. But, you know, I am opening up for discussion on whether or not we want to do this.
I'll just say, I mean, I quickly Googled, you know, board norms, and there's, you know, enough here that, you know, I'm certainly open to, I don't know, it obviously, whatever we do would be open meeting, adhering to the Open Meetings Act. So, yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it. I think there may be a few areas where there's uncertainty, and so it would be good to clarify that. I don't know how long and elaborate, but I would imagine members would come with certain ideas, and then we'd wrestle with them. Or you want to do a brainstorming session, or I don't know. I'm open to anything like that.
Whatever you guys want to do. I just think it would be helpful, and you're right. I you know, if you do Google board norms, you'll see a lot of different examples. They're not overly specific. They're just, you know, this is the way the board expects to operate. And they're you know, and I don't think we need to be overly specific. But I think it would be helpful, especially when we have new board members come on, to understand, you know, how the board generally typically wants to operate.
That's right. I as one of the new board members, I would be happy to, you know, take a first leap at it. I think sometimes when you are the newest member coming onto a body, you probably have the most questions. At least I felt like I did, and the introductory training was great, but I can just say from experience, our training, great, you know, bylaws, great, but there are still areas that a new board member, at least speaking for myself, you know, had questions. I even had questions about a work session. You know, not to be negative, but I sort of was curious as to what's the difference between a work session versus a regular, you know, a regular board meeting. So even just having some understanding of the different terminology. Again, I sat in on one of the agenda meetings, and it's on the calendar as agenda planning meeting, but it seemed more like an agenda confirmation meeting as opposed to planning. So just things like that if you've been on the board a long time, it wouldn't be a question because you've gone through it. But, you know, again, as a new board member, I just feel like having some of these maybe norms is, a term of art. I think of it more of like rules of the road or just rules of engagement. Like when you go into anything, someone will say, okay, let's just talk about some rules of the road. We're going to do this. That I think is something we really don't ever, at least it would be helpful to have. And I don't think it needs to be, set in stone. It can be sort of maybe cast in wet cement so that people can, change it as they see fit. But, we are a group coming together. I think having a little bit more guidance would be very helpful. And like I said, I would be happy to, spearhead a committee or help in any way that I can.
And I'll just piggyback, and that's basically what. Sorry, Dr. Rice, I didn't see you, so I'm going to just.
Please, no, it's all good. Thank you.
I think to Nikki's point and to Ellen's point, I do think that each of us come with. I can recall my first days on the board, but still, questions that we have. I mean, I think about the consent agenda, or even just reading the agenda and knowing how the agenda moves. I mean, there are thoughts on how we invite people to the table. I remember there were times when people were inviting vendors to be speakers. I mean, there's quite a few things that I can think of from my just in introducing myself to the board or being introduced to the board, but then questions that we still have that I think that it's a good idea. And I think that it's a good idea for us to begin cataloging what are questions that we have, and to Ellen's point, what are some of the things that we recall when we first came on the board that we wish we would have known.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pugh, and to you, Mr. Strayhorn.
That was very well said, Dr. Pugh. Thank you for that. And I just want you to know, Ellen, you're not alone in this. As the other new board member, I too feel the same way. I feel a bit unprepared as far as the rules of engagement are concerned. My sports background, I'm used to being in uncomfortable situations and kind of just going through the process and trusting it by experience. But I think that, training and having some, committee would be a very helpful thing. I think that's, needed, not just for Ellen and I, but even future boards as people come on. So, yeah, I welcome it. I think it's a great idea. It's needed. No one was born knowing, the rules, all these rules of engagement, board etiquette. No, you just don't have that naturally. So yes, training for it and understanding it is warranted. And I think it's a good idea. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mr. Strayhorn.
Thank you.
Dr. Pritchett.
Thank you. Everybody has pretty well summed up what I'm thinking at this point. Also, to put it succinctly, it certainly can't hurt. And I think it is needed from not the newest board member, but the almost newest board member. And I can't speak for Tiffany, but certainly understanding how the board works, what the expectations are for all of us. To Nikki's point, I do think whether it's a subcommittee, full board, whatever, the only thing I would recommend is that prior to that we make sure that everybody does have the most current bylaws of the board, copies of the bylaws, so that we're not kind of going at cross purposes here. We don't need to discuss things, I guess, that we already have in place, which are in the bylaws. For example, agenda planning, has been talked about. And so that in case there has been, and I believe we made an amendment to the bylaws here within the last year related to cancellation of meetings. So just so we can review that or any other documents that we felt as though we needed. I don't know if the board's ever done norms before or these rules of the road to be able to review those. So that would be my only recommendation as we go through this process.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pritchett. Any other questions or comments from board members?
This is Tiffany Tilley. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Ms. Tilley.
I just want to say I concur. I think when Judy and I came aboard, we were looking at each other, asking each other questions, trying to figure it all out. And I think a handbook or something, a small handbook or something would definitely be good for board members coming on. So, and maybe even, somebody taking the role of mentor, and spending a day or something with the new board members would be a good idea.
It's a great idea.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments of board members?
So I'm wondering if we need a motion or if we're in agreement. I suppose it's probably good to do some kind of motion so that we have something official.
Yep. You raised the issue, President Albrecht. Would you like to put it in the form of a motion?
Sure. So I move that the State Board of Education create a mechanism to identify existing or desired board norms and bring it forward for full vote at a future board meeting.
Okay, very good. So we've got a motion. We've got support from Dr. Pugh. Any additional discussion?
Just curious,
I'm sorry,
what is a mechanism? Are you talking about meetings, or is it some kind of a survey, or it could be any of those? Just
yeah, so that's I'm suggesting any type of that. I was thinking, my personal thought was to do a couple small group meetings. But if the board has a different desire, that's fine with me. But that was kind of my thought.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion? Hearing none. Marilyn, if we could do a roll call vote, please.
Lipton,
Yes.
McMillan,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
Pugh,
Yes.
Snyder,
Abstain.
Strayhorn,
Yes. Yes.
Tilley,
Okay.
Yes.
Albrecht,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. We are at the added agenda item from President Albrecht relative to the June 8th State Board meeting. To you, Madam President.
Yes, so we are currently still under the Open Meetings Act that allows us to meet remotely, while the county has not renewed as of yet their what do you call it? State of emergency? Is that what it is?
Emergency order.
Thank you. Emergency order. The city of Lansing still has one in effect that will be in effect for our June board meeting. My recommendation is to continue to meet remotely through June, but I would, what I can do is make a motion and then we can discuss it. So I would move that the June board meeting continue to operate in a remote fashion consistent with the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have discussion?
Sure. I would just say
Mr.
that
McMillan.
I'd like to meet in person and allow people who don't feel comfortable to meet in person not, but I think the dynamics are a lot better when we're meeting in person, and I think that, I mean, I think we should be able to. I mean, the masks are coming off all over the place, and it just seems like we can, you know, I think local boards should be meeting as well, even more so, and so we can, and a lot of them are, but we could lead by example as well. And I'd like to be able to meet in person.
Okay, thank you very much. Other discussion from state board members?
Hi, this is Tiffany.
Ms. Tilley.
I really miss you guys. I wish we could have done the retreat in person, but I know with, you know, the pandemic, that wasn't possible. If you guys do meet in June, unfortunately, with this car accident, I won't be able to sit there all day. I have injuries to my back and to my neck. So hopefully, you know, another meeting I would be able to, but I know I wouldn't be able to do June. So just want to say that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tilley. And we wish you a speedy recovery as you and I have talked.
Thank you.
You bet. Other discussion from state board members?
I think that there is no substitute, certainly, for meeting in person, and I certainly do appreciate that sentiment for sure. I don't think anyone is suggesting that we do this in perpetuity, but we have all personally and professionally gone through so much. I think that July, the fact that there isn't a meeting in July, provides just some added space. While masks are coming off and what have you, people are just now getting their second vaccine and getting through that 2-week period. Again, speaking for myself, you know, starting a new endeavor remotely, it's a challenge, but I haven't made a secret of it. I have multiple sclerosis, and whether I like it or not, I am considered an eggshell plaintiff, if you will, to use a legal term. And that because they simply don't know how I will respond if, God forbid, I were to get infected, it's simply not a risk that either I or any of my doctors have been willing to take. And so the fact that the Open Meetings Act order does allow for people with a medical condition to partake and not just partake, but be accommodated to be able to participate remotely through the end of the year. And that's in current state law. I do think that waiting and being very, very careful not to sort of, to use a football metaphor, which I usually don't, but I've heard it before, sort of to fumble at the 1-yard line, which I think makes so much sense. It would be really, really tragic. And our calendar does have this pause in July, and I do think that I don't see any downside to having one more meeting remotely in June, despite the fact that I completely am sympathetic to the concept of and the synergy of meeting in person. One more point I would like to add is that one of the sort of like bright spots that people have told me about is that the public has felt more empowered to participate in our meetings because they do have a remote option. And I think that since all of us take our responsibility to everyone in the state, as we were all elected statewide, very seriously, I would just like us to consider that you know was sort of a perhaps a silver lining. The ability for people, teachers, we heard from a teacher, parents, that are simply not able to take time off from work or their families to get in a car and drive perhaps an hour or two to Lansing to appear in person. So I would like all of us to consider how valuable that is in helping us do our jobs and represent everyone in this state. And public participation is really, really important. So that's something that I hope we will think about as well, to continue, to the extent permitted by law, allowing members of the public to continue to participate in a way that that allows them to be an active participant in this body. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Lipton. I appreciate that. Anyone else care to contribute to the discussion? Dr. Pugh.
I would agree and concur with Dr. Albrecht, Cassandra, with postponing. I too, also concurring with Tom and others. I greatly look forward to meeting with everyone in person and sitting around the lunch table, having frivolous conversation about the happenings in life and the things that bond us together, even when we don't always see eye to eye on issues. But at this time, I do think that the pause and going on the other side of July, I think it sets a good example. And I think that there's just some things that we need to work through. We don't even know about our bylaws. I don't know if we figured that part out as far as for those who couldn't attend in person, such as Ellen and Tiffany, if we would be able to include them as voting members. There's some other things that I just won't even mention here that we know we would have to work through, that I think we would be in a better position, hopefully, on the other side of July. So I agree.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pugh. Any other discussion? Ms. Snyder, you have something in the chat. Would you care to share that or not?
I just wanted to say thank you to Ellen, and I will probably abstain again because I think that the issue, though I understand where Tom's coming from with wanting to meet in person, is multifaceted, and all of you have shared exactly what and why. And so, you know, without legislation that allows people like Ellen and others who have shared to participate in a way that it works for them and is healthy for them, and then also the same push for Michiganders to be able to get on and comment remotely. People who don't live in Lansing, people who are very far from Lansing, Upers, West Michiganders, Northern Michiganders. I think that there's something to be said for what we need to do next, not just pushing it out until June, and that's something I've been talking about for a while now. So just in an honor to you all, that would be something that I will be abstaining again, because it's not a for or against, it's just we need to do what's best for ourselves individually at this point in time.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Marilyn, if you would be kind enough to take a roll call vote.
Yes. Lipton?
Yes.
McMillan?
No.
Yes.
Pritchett? Pugh?
Yes.
Snyder?
Abstain.
Strayhorn,
Yes.
Tilly,
Yes.
Albridge,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. We're at that element of our board agenda, board member comments. Are there any board members who would like to comment additionally?
Dr. Rice, to the point that was just raised, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in. I do know that Nikki did raise some time ago the thought of having more public participation now that we are operating remotely, and just thoughts on how do we take advantage of that. I do think that it does provide an opportunity that we've recognized that wasn't there before. And I just hope that we can improve upon that. Some thoughts about having comments maybe closer to the lunchtime. I know that it comes after our lunch, but somewhere for the public, maybe thinking through how it might accommodate their schedules, their lunch schedules. Also, Ellen has brought up a few times the use of social media, maybe making sure that we are posting about the meetings on our social media platform so that then board members can share that. But just really encouraging that and bolstering the use of public participation more. I think that we could get more input, more participation, and people really have input in the conversation that we have here.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dr. Pugh. Other board member comments? Other board member comments?
Yeah,
Mr. McMillan.
There was a comment earlier today about vaccinating kids, and I didn't want to do any debating at the time, but just now at the board comments, I would say that I just checked the CDC website. It still says that for healthy kids, the flu is more dangerous to them than COVID. I also agree with the prominent medical doctor in Grand Rapids area that it's really medical malpractice to suggest or to tell people that are at no risk or virtually no risk of something to get like a vaccine or to have a procedure done. Especially when we're talking about something that's not approved by the FDA. It's authorized, it's not even approved. We don't know the long-term effects of having COVID. We also don't know the long-term effects, obviously, of the vaccine. So again, giving it to, so the idea of vaccinating isn't for the kids. I think it was mentioned it was for the kids. Some have argued earlier when vaccines weren't available very much that perhaps there's people vulnerable at home. But now with vaccines, I mean, you can walk in at any Meijer, tons of places, and they're widely available for anybody who wants them. So it seems to me that argument is no longer valid. So, I think that it's if you follow the science, it's clear that healthy kids don't need to be vaccinated and shouldn't be vaccinated. It would, like I said, a prominent doctor said it's actually a medical malpractice to suggest that these kids would need to. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Other board members' comments? Ms. Snyder.
I would just echo some of the things that Tom just said regarding vaccination in general. I testified before the House Oversight Committee, and it's a very personal topic I don't typically share about, and I consider those my pearls, if you will. And so I would just really exercise a lot of caution as we move forward, mostly not to politicize it from the perspective of if you have a friend or a family member or a neighbor that is not going to be vaccinated or is shying away from it or wants to see more research or wants to see it FDA approved or wants longitudinal studies, which we do not have, which is not really, it's a fact, we don't have them. just have love for their care and concerns and their decision making, and don't assume that it is because they don't care about people around them. So not to get don't-y on us all, but if you care to see that, it's out there. And just echoing what you said, Tom.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. President Ulrich.
Thank you. I would just say everybody should be talking to their healthcare provider. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of opinions. There's absolutely no shortage of opinions. Anyone who has concerns should talk to their healthcare providers, and that is all I think that we need to be sharing at this point.
Thank you, President Ulrich. Other thoughts or comments from board members? Going once, I'm sorry, Dr. Pugh, I beg your pardon.
Oh, there it is. So, I mean, and just in following up on what Cassandra says, I think that we have to let parents do their research, have conversations with their physicians, and come to the decisions. I think that we do have to be careful in the information that we spew and put out. You know, for me, I have seen the devastation of COVID on families, as I'm sure many of you have by now. And I've also had friends who have had to call me and ask me about medications that they've not heard of after contracting the virus. Myself, I'm a person who has a difficult time taking any type of medication or putting anything foreign into my body. But at this time, when we're talking about a virus that has impacted so many lives, that we have children who will be devastated. I think I saw at least 40,000 children who have lost parents, and some of those children will also have to think about how parents and loved ones may have contracted that virus by them carrying that home, and we'll be dealing with those issues from here on out, the emotional toll that takes. But as it relates to the vaccine, I do agree it's people's personal preference, but we also have to realize that we can, I'm going to just use the terms that I've used. You know, people can be, in a time like now, can be suicidal, and people can be homicidal, meaning that the decisions that a person makes does impact me and those people who surround them. And so I think we have to think about that. We also have to think about medicine and science, and think about any medicine that we put in our body is a, you know, it's a practicing, and it may not respond the same. But I also know that the virus itself responds differently, and we've seen the devastation that it's caused. We've also know that people have had to take foreign substances to treat the virus to remain alive, or to address the impact that can be long-term impacts to children and adults.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pugh. Other reflections from board members? Dr. Pritchett, are you popping up to reflect, or are you just popping up to pop up? Dr. Pritchett, a comment. I see you in the chat now. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to, with 3 weeks left, and I believe Dr. Rice has in several communications indicated it's been a brutal year. And I think most of you know I have the privilege of being able to interact with my granddaughters pretty much on a daily basis, but I also am able to do some drop off and pickups as they go to school. So I'm able to see children every day, which for me is great. So I want to go back to a message that I've been trying to share for most of this year, and to thank the students because they've done a phenomenal job all year, and they come out of school pretty typical from what I've seen from year to year, chattering about this and that, things they liked, things they didn't like, and running up to their parents or whoever is there to pick them up and jumping into cars and sharing what their day was like. And so to the students of Michigan, in all of our schools, to the staff in particular, I just want to say thank you. And we've got 3 weeks left. I do know a lot of districts are planning for summer schools, for summer learning. I would encourage parents to at least examine those opportunities if they feel they're appropriate for their family or work into their family schedules, to take advantage of those. So that their students may continue to be in a setting like that, again, if it works for them as a family, because I do know a lot of schools are beginning to advertise that, or I've seen several news stories. So again, thank you for that. And thanks to all the educators and mostly our students and families out there who have endured something they never planned on, as none of us did. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchett. Any other board members for comments? Hearing and seeing none. Marilyn, are there any individuals who wish to address the board during today's meeting?
I have received no requests for public comment during today's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Future meeting dates will be Tuesday, June 8th, Tuesday, August 10th, Tuesday, September 14th, all at 9:30 a.m., all regular meetings. Let the record show that it is 12:19 and that we are once again giving you back the gift of time. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.